Today, we are going to be taking a look at all of the new Season 3 Iron Banner weapons in Destiny 2 to determine which ones are best, which ones you should spend your time grinding for. And so, let's get started. What is up, guys? Rick Kakas here, and yes, today we are taking a look at all of the new Iron Banner weapons and comparing and contrasting their stats and perks to determine where they'll fit in the meta and if they're worth going out and trying to acquire. Now, at the time of making this video, these weapons are not currently in the game. However, they are available in the Destiny database, and because of Destiny 2's rather simplistic weapon system, we can look at the stats and perks and really determine exactly where these weapons will function in the PvP and PvE metas. Very quickly before we get started, guys, if you're looking for amazing gaming headphones, I recently got partnered with ASTRO. Check the link down below. You get a discount code and help me out. Simple as that. Now, let's get started here with the new Iron Banner Sidearm, the Allied Demand. This weapon, firstly, taking a look at its stats, exists in the 300 rounds per minute sidearm archetype. This is generally actually faster than normal. Most commonly, you're going to see around 260. Another comparable weapon is the Vertical Orbit QSM. I get this weapon all the time. It's from Curse of Osiris. Generally, that's not a very competitive weapon, but that's aligning with this weapon's archetype. In terms of other statistics, well, nothing really stands out, and you can see that when we compare the Allied Demand to the Vertical Orbit. Like, there's not a stat that really is massively bigger than the Vertical Orbit, except for aim assist. The Allied Demand does have a sizable chunk more aim assist than the Vertical Orbit, and therefore may have a competitive edge, at least in terms of statistics. But moving on, we do have to take a look at this weapon's perks. Firstly, it has Adaptive Frame as an intrinsic perk, well-rounded grip, reliable, and sturdy. Next, we have 3 different sights to choose from. After that, we have the choice between, firstly, Extended Magazine, simply extending the magazine, and next we have Ricochet Rounds. Ricochet Rounds does provide a pretty sizable bonus to range, a very important stat for sidearms. And lastly, we have Auto Loading Holster. This weapon, while being holstered, will reload after a short period. So you can stow away this weapon, use another weapon, come back to the Allied Demand, and it will be reloaded. It can be a very useful perk, but in terms of sidearms, really not what you're looking for. There's actually been a pretty big influx of relatively competitive sidearms into Destiny 2, especially the new Braytech sidearm. They're rocking things like Kill Clip, and that's blowing auto-loading holster out of the water. Frankly, the Allied Demand doesn't have anything really substantial in terms of stats, and the perks are rather lackluster as well, unfortunately. Now, moving on from there, the next weapon we're going to take a look at is the Multimach CCX Legendary Kinetic Submachine Gun. Taking a look at the stats here, this belongs to the 900 rounds per minute damage archetype. This is extremely common, however, less common for kinetic submachine guns. Those actually mostly belong to the 600 rounds per minute archetype. Now, in terms of its other stats, well, it's best to compare it to another legendary kinetic 900 rounds per minute submachine gun with the New City from Curse of Osiris. This does see some play, really nothing even close to like the Antiope, which is in the 600, but some play due to the fact that it does have quick draw. Now, this weapon has better range and better stability, clearly. The Multimach really just has better handling, and in the hidden stats has much better aim assist and even recoil direction. So it may just be easier to utilize and land targets with the Multimach, but really nothing absolutely substantial in terms of the stats, and missing out on that range and stability is definitely going to hurt you. But what are this weapon's perks like? Well, firstly, we have Lightweight Frame. Superb handling, move faster with this weapon equipped. Next up, we have 2 different sights to choose between, and then we have Alloy Magazine, faster reloads when the magazine is empty, or Accurized Rounds. This weapon can fire longer distances, increases range. And lastly, we have Dynamic Sway Reduction. When holding down the trigger, this weapon's sway reduction system boosts accuracy over time. So even though the Multimach doesn't have the best range or stability, well, Accurized Rounds helps with the range, and Dynamic Sway Reduction helps with the stability. So this is certainly a weapon worth taking a look at. I don't think it's going to be breaking any metas just because its damage archetype of the 900 rounds per minute SMGs just is not strong, and is nowhere near as strong as stuff like the Antiope. But if you do already like this archetype, maybe take a look at this weapon. Now, moving on from there, the next weapon we're taking a look at is the Finite Impactor Legendary Energy Hand Cannon. Taking a look at the stats, this belongs to the 140 rounds per minute damage archetype for hand cannons. This is a very common archetype that a lot of very competitive weapons do belong in. Stuff like the Better Devils, the DFA, the Annual Skate, all of those things belong in the 140 damage archetype. So that's a pretty good factor of this weapon. It belongs to a competitive archetype. But in terms of its stats, range, stability, magazine, reload speed, and handling, really none of them are impressive. And you can see that when we take a look at the Annual Skate. The Annual Skate actually beats out this weapon in range, stability, same magazine, slightly worse reload, but better handling. So the Finite Impactor really isn't bringing anything in terms of major stats to the table. The one advantage it does have is a very, very high recoil direction, which could just, the feel of this weapon could make it something you may enjoy. But aside from that tiny factor, nothing in terms of stats stands out. So its perks have definitely got to bring it. Do they? Well, firstly, it has adaptive frame, a well-rounded grip, reliable and sturdy. Then it has 2 different sights to choose between. And then after that, you have the choice between drop magazine drops on reload, wasting ammunition but greatly increasing reload speed. This is actually a pretty decent perk in PvP because losing the ammo doesn't matter as much. Next, we have Appended Mag. This weapon's magazine is built for higher capacity, so it increases your magazine size. And lastly, and interestingly, we have Snapshot Sights. Faster time to aim down sights. This is not a very common perk for hand cannons. And making you aim down sights faster is, technically going to increase your time to kill. If you aim down sights faster, you can shoot sooner, and therefore you're getting your damage on target before your opponent, who is likely not using something else with snapshot sights. So this is definitely an interesting perk choice just because it's so uncommon. Is it going to be better than stuff like opening shot and just other hand cannons with range increasing perks? Well, that's a very good question. And the answer is going to come down to personal preference. However, if you are someone who enjoys hand cannons, this is certainly a unique one that may be worth checking out. Moving on from there, we have the Dark Decider Legendary Energy Auto Rifle. This weapon, in terms of stats, belongs to the 720 rounds per minute damage archetype. Now, this is a relatively rare damage archetype, but more common in the energy slot. Now, in terms of its statistics, I hate to keep saying this, but unfortunately, nothing really stands out. And this is just very indicative of how Bungie does weapon design. They're very afraid to experiment. They're very afraid to introduce weapons with massive stability and no range. They just don't do that kind of thing. So they have a lot of weapons remarkably similar to one another. So you have to have excellent stats or really kind of just barely stats that eke an advantage out over the competition to be worth noticing. And unfortunately, the Dark Decider doesn't necessarily have that going on. Compared to its competition, the Valakadin, this is another 720 energy auto rifle. The Valakadin, in terms of stability, magazine, reload speed, it's almost the same gun. You can look at the comparison here. Minor differences, like the Valakadin has a tiny bit worse stability, but then slightly better magazine and reload speed. Like, they're almost interchangeable stats, and they're only a couple of points difference. The stat that does stand out, yet again, is one of those hidden stats in terms of aim assist. The Dark Decider does have a sizable chunk better aim assist, and that is going to matter. If you have an almost identical gun, if you're someone who already likes those Energy 720 auto rifles like a Valakadin, well, the Dark Decider is basically the same thing in terms of stats with better aim assist. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, in terms of the perks, firstly, we have rapid fire frame, deeper ammo reserves, slightly faster reload when magazine is empty. We then have 3 different ballistic choices, and then, interestingly, we have high caliber rounds, causing more flinch on opponents you shoot. High caliber rounds is undoubtedly a powerful perk, especially in PvE, and when you combine that with a very high rate of fire, interesting things could definitely happen. Next, we have Extended Mag, and this, already coming with a pretty big magazine size, is actually a pretty decent benefit in PvE. And lastly, we have Auto Loading Holster. Not a terrible perk, but just not necessarily something you're looking for when you're talking about the top tier. You want this to be an add-on to something already, like the Sims of the Past rocket launcher from the raid has auto-loading holster, but the main draw is cluster bomb. This is taking up a main perk slot. So really the main draw of the Dark Decider is that in terms of stats, nothing stands out, but nothing is less than usual. Totally fair statistics, and then it does have high caliber rounds, which is a notable good perk. However, there's another weapon in the same archetype. It's a kinetic weapon called the Guiding Star. It's a dead orbit weapon. It also has high caliber rounds. That weapon hasn't made any major waves in PvP or PvE, and that really tells me that even with high caliber rounds, the Dark Decider really just isn't that amazing of a weapon. But it is time to move on to the power weapon category. We're going to start out here with the Occluded Finality Legendary Sniper Rifle. Taking a look at these stats here, this belongs to the highest damage archetype for sniper rifles, similar to the Long Walk, the original Trials of the Nine Season 1 reward sniper rifle. It does have a decent chunk higher stability when compared with the Long Walk sniper rifle, but stability on snipers isn't the absolute biggest factor, especially when you have the slowest shooting, highest damaging category of sniper here with only 3 rounds in a magazine. And in terms of hidden stats, the one that really matters on snipers is aim assist, and the Occluded Finality actually has 1 less than the Long Walk, so nothing really standing out too much in stats. In terms of perks, it has aggressive frame, which is indicative of its damage archetype. Then you have 2 different sights. The bottom one is a short zoom sight, which is important. Next up, you have armor piercing rounds, doesn't matter too much. Then you have tactical mag. Getting potentially 1 more round in a magazine is a reasonable benefit. And lastly, you have field prep, increased ammo reserves, faster reload when crouched. This really doesn't come up basically at all in PvP, and in PvE, yes, it may come up. Yes, you may be able to have more reserves than other snipers, which is absolutely a benefit, but if you're going to use a sniper, you're going to use the Darcy, or you're going to use the Borealis, or one of the fantastically powerful exotic snipers. Like, you're just not going to give up your sniper shot to this weapon, especially when there's other ones that have stuff like triple tap, and are just things going on that are better than field prep. And that's really the story with all of the perks here. None of the perks really stand out for PvE or PvP. For PvP especially, you're looking for something like Quick Draw, or you're looking for something like Snapshot. Those are both absent here, so frankly, not a really exciting weapon. Moving on from there, the last weapon we're going to look at here is the Shining Sphere Legendary Rocket Launcher. So here, stats don't necessarily matter as much as the perks do. In terms of blast radius, however, it does have a lower blast radius than stuff like the Sins of the Past has a very high one, so this is more in the middle with 75 compared to the Curtain Call, which is 55, and the Sins of the Past, which is 95. Now the problem here is that you really don't want to split the difference. The Sins of the Past is great because it has that huge blast radius, meaning that you can just lay waste to a ton of adds. And the Curtain Call, having a relatively small blast radius, is also fantastic because it makes sure the cluster bomb explosion is on a smaller target, so more of those cluster bombs should hit the same boss. And that cluster bomb mention is very, very important. It's absolutely the best perk you are looking for, period, when talking about a rocket launcher. So, does the Shining Sphere have it? Well, firstly, we have Adaptive Frame. Then we have 3 different launch types. After that, we have high velocity rounds, increasing the velocity. After that, we have Alloy Casting to increase your reload speed. Not actually a bad perk. But then lastly, we have Pulse Monitor. Auto reloads part of the magazine when the wielder is critically wounded. Pulse Monitor is just not a very good perk, especially on rocket launchers. This weapon doesn't have 2 rounds in a magazine or anything like that. It's really got nothing going on. Absolutely not worth getting. So, frankly, a rather depressing bunch of weapons. None of them have best of category stats for their archetypes. None of them have incredible perks that really stand out and make me think they're going to change the meta. What we have here is a pretty big bunch of lackluster weapons. And that is definitely a downside. If you take a look at some of the other weapons that have really kind of come into their own and are weapons that people are going after, like the Aikilos weapons that are dropped from Escalation Protocol, those weapons break the traditional gun layouts, right? They have more than one main perk, and they have unique perks. These Iron Banner weapons are just fitting to the very traditional, very simplistic, and bad weapon layouts that we've had since launch, where we have only one main perk, and those weapons are just not cutting it anymore. And therefore, again, we have rather lackluster weapons. There is some bests out of this pretty mediocre bunch, however. Now, if you are trying to grind Iron Banner and you are looking for weapons to unlock, the ones I would recommend are firstly the Multimach CCX Submachine Gun. It doesn't have the worst stats. It's in a damage archetype that isn't too represented in kinetic categories, and it has 2 good perks with accurized rounds and dynamic sway reduction. You could make something happen with this weapon. The next weapon I would really take a look at is the Finite Impactor hand cannon, just because that pretty nuts recoil direction and snapshot sights, this could be, again, a hand cannon players. If you already like that weapon category, this could be a weapon that you do enjoy. Aside from that, really nothing else I would recommend. And so guys, that is it for the video. I hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. And if you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickKakis. That's linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.